So a lot of men get prostate cancer. It happens to be the second greatest killer of men in the United States and probably around the world. But for those of us that have it or have had it, the idea here is to stay alive. And so that's the theme of this podcast, staying alive. Listen, let's do this.
This podcast deals with prostate cancer, surgery, medication, and other medical topics. The host is a prostate cancer survivor who is recounting his experience with treatment. He is not a medical professional, and you should not use his commentary as medical advice. Please always consult a medical professional when learning about and understanding prostate cancer or any other disease.
So here we are. Those of you who have been following my podcast also know that here in the first couple of weeks of June, I'm well underway getting treatment for a recurrence of prostate cancer. I'm here in Knoxville, Tennessee. As you can tell, this is not my usual studio. This is a beautiful hotel room, which will be my home, at least for the weekdays, until the end of July when my treatment is over. But I have been reviewing a lot of comments, both on my YouTube page and also in my Facebook group, for a lot of men who are newly diagnosed or some who are going through recurrence like I am. And it's unfortunate, but a lot of these men are sometimes questioning why they're getting treatment for themselves and what happens if you don't get treatment. At the same time, there are others who are starting treatment but are reluctant to move forward because of the fear of side effects and all that sort of thing. So what I wanted to do is, in addition to just kind of staying up to date for those of you that listen to the podcast or watch the YouTube channel that I have, I just wanted to give some, I guess I'll call them words of wisdom as to the outlook for those of you who are newly diagnosed or those of you who have had surgery or facing recurrence. And even those of you who had surgery, had a treatment for recurrence, but PSA is still showing up. And this is the theme of all this, is about not letting the cancer get the better of you. And at the end of the day, it's about staying alive. So there was somebody made a comment in my YouTube channel a few weeks ago. Now, I don't know if this was a troll or somebody just trying to cause trouble, but they basically said something along the lines of, regardless of how you're diagnosed, the doctors are just trying to get rich and they don't know what they're doing and nobody really knows, et cetera. So it was a very negative position that this person was taking. I think there was some truth in it, but it was someone obviously who was very angry. I never really caught their situation. But in any case, I wanted to remind all of you that prostate cancer, if it's untreated and it starts to spread, it will kill you. I mean, that's the simplest way to put things. And so that being the case, and there are some caveats as well, but that being the case, our goal, what we owe ourselves and our family, those who depend on us, those who we depend on, we owe them our strength, our mission to stay alive for a long and regular life. And down the road, when we go to that great YouTube studio up in the sky, it will be from some other cause. It will not be from prostate cancer. And so the perspective that I mentioned some of this in my last broadcast, but I think the reluctance that most men have to dealing with prostate cancer, the initial diagnosis, is the fear of the side effects. And I talk about this all the time over and over again. And mainly the side effects are, if you have surgery and even radiation sometimes, then you may have treated the cancer, but you may never have an erection again, or you may be incontinent for the rest of your life. So your sex life is over, you wear diapers forever, and what a miserable way to lead a life and move forward. And it's easy to think that way because while we have continence and while we have erectile function, we sometimes don't really appreciate how good we have it. So with all that being said, in the most dire of situations where you have those side effects, and I want to make a case for those side effects being a lot more rare than you may expect. But in the event that you have a bad surgery or your cancer is so advanced that they really have to do an abundant amount of treatment, never lose sight of the fact that even without those functions, you're still a living being. You still have your mind. You still have your motor skills, taste, eyesight. And these are all things that were presented to me when I initially went through surgery and I had fears of all these side effects. And if you've watched my videos from almost 9 years ago, I try to stay very positive about all things and hope for the best. And I have to say, I got lucky. It's not that I regained my body 100% like before surgery, but it recovered to the point where I did regain erectile function and I had continence. Never as good as it was before, but certainly enough where, it is what it is and you move on. But on this theme of staying alive, I wanted to talk about the timing of treatment, the timing of diagnosis, and kind of what to do with some of this information that's given to you. You're going to find that most doctors you meet with, especially maybe your own urologist, they sometimes, they're doctors. I am not a doctor. I'm just a guy that has gone through this experience. But I've gone through the experience of interacting with doctors. And I think while they're amazing at what they do, not every urologist is as knowledgeable about prostate cancer as they should be. And I'm not saying I have more knowledge than they do, but you'll find that urologists that are very general in nature, they do a very good job. But in terms of understanding time frame and treatment methods and that sort of thing, they're not all equal. Some are certainly better than others, and most importantly, some are more experienced than others. So I'm gonna break this into 3 timelines. So let's start with pre-surgery. So you've just been diagnosed, or you've been getting PSA tests and they're rising, and let's say your PSA rises above 4.0, and then ultimately you start to ask questions about that PSA level and what it means. And a higher PSA does not always mean that you have cancer. It just means you have a high PSA. It can come from different causes, including BPH as well. But anyway, when you start testing, and your age as well, I started testing above 4.0 when I was in my 50s. I think 49, 50 years old, I was already hitting 4.0 and above PSA. But a high PSA is a first signal to you to keep an eye on things. It's not a sign of prostate cancer, but what you have to do is keep monitoring it. And it really depends. When you have prostate cancer, you don't know it. You don't feel anything. There's no lumps. There's no tiredness. It's just something that's growing inside of you. It's not necessarily a tumor. The thing with prostate cancer cells aren't necessarily, not that they're tumor cells, but when you get a cancer tumor for other kinds of cancers, there's a lump of some kind. Prostate cancer cells tend to invade the prostate and then break through and spread through the body. I almost think of them like nanorobots. so what will happen is when they get aggressive, they settle down somewhere and they start to create cancer. Anyway, long story short, if you are 50 and above, even in your 40s, and your PSA is consistently, high above 4.0, it probably isn't a bad idea to at some point take some tests. There are some tests that will give you some likelihood. Sometimes they are cancer markers, genetic tests, but sometimes it just makes sense to get a biopsy. And in particular, if your PSA is getting to 4.5, certainly as it approaches 5 and above, you want to get a biopsy. But the idea there is to start to understand why the PSA may be at the level that it is. The earlier you can get at prostate cancer, if you get at it before it has escaped the prostate, and by the way, it takes a long time for prostate cancer to escape the prostate in many cases. It's very slow moving, but if you can get at it when it's still very young and it's within the prostate and you opt to have surgery and maybe even radiation, it gets eradicated, and then you will have eliminated that death sentence that it may have delivered to you down the road. So step 1 is to figure out what to do about an initial occurrence. And if you can stop it dead in its tracks, that's it. It's done for life. Prostate cancer is one of the fully curable cancers. So if they get it early and it's eradicated, that's it. You're done. No more prostate cancer. And then you will stay alive for as long as your natural life cycle dictates. But let's say you opt to have treatment, whether it's surgery or radiation, and then down the road sometime, your PSA starts to rise. And it's possible. I think that happens in about 30% of the cases. Certainly it happened to me. There are some men who have a rise in PSA within months of surgery. There are others who have it reappear years later. For me, it took 8.5 years before it was formally diagnosed as a recurrence. And even then, when they diagnose a recurrence, it's a probability of recurrence. They can't see it. The recurrence doesn't show up on any scans when it's non-aggressive. All that you know is that a PSA has risen, and when your prostate is removed, there should be no PSA. Sometimes a rise in PSA comes from leftover tissue, but when you get to a PSA level of 0.2, they generally assume that it has risen. So the second step in staying alive is to seek treatment when there's a recurrence. Now, here's an important caveat. It is possible. So when I say having prostate cancer is a death sentence, it's a death sentence if the prostate cancer starts to get aggressive and starts to move around the body. That will almost inevitably end up in your bones and in certain organs, and that will lead to horrific cancer, unfortunately, which is in some cases incurable. But that's later in the game. It's possible, and no one really knows the answers. Maybe AI and quantum computing will resolve this in the future, but it's possible for you to have prostate cancer and have it so slow moving that it takes 20, 30 years before it even becomes aggressive. And so there is a school of thought that says, well, if I wait, maybe I'll be lucky and it won't proceed quickly and then I can outlive it. And that may be true in some cases, but it really is a game of Russian roulette. So my way of thinking is quite simply, if you know the cancer is there, even though it's non-aggressive, and my cancer is not very aggressive, but it's there and it is growing, get rid of it, because I don't want to take the chance that just by waiting, I waited too long and it got to a point where it becomes irreversible. And so there are a lot of men who at 0.20 in their PSA will opt to have radiation to eradicate it. I didn't jump at 0.20. I waited till 0.40, and it took 3 years for my PSA to go from 0.2 to 0.4, which is a very long time. The doubling time is what they call it. If a doubling time is 6 months or less, then they really get concerned because it appears to be moving aggressively. But in my case, I even question, is waiting till 0.4 too late, too long? I've since learned that they really say at 0.5 and below, you're probably going to be okay, but nothing is certain. So anyway, the idea there is, my goal is to do as much as I can with the information that I have. So stage 1 for me was surgery. Stage 1 for you may be surgery. It may be radiation. It may be CyberKnife. If there is a stage 2, or a part 2, I should say, then radiation is almost always the treatment for it. Somebody posted in my YouTube channel just a couple days ago that they had surgery. It looks like their PSA is rising, and their urologist is recommending that they just go on ADT to resolve the problem. And, the ADT, I've been on ADT for quite a few weeks now, Orgobix, as many of you know. Orgobix, Lupron, these are all forms of ADT. What they effectively do is they remove the testosterone from your body. And when the testosterone is no longer present, the cancer cells, they become dormant, or some of them die, but it's not a cure. It's a temporary measure. So without being a doctor, I would suggest that if you have a recurrence, then going on ADT is not going to be the long-term solution. It certainly will be a temporary solution, but for most men, I'm very lucky with ADT. I have almost zero side effects, but a lot of men have a lot of problems with ADT. And hot flashes are very common. Erectile dysfunction, a loss of libido, loss of bone density, tiredness, weight gain, the list goes on and on. I do think a lot of these are controllable, but ADT is not a solution for recurrence. It's a Band-Aid. And if you're going to have radiation for recurrence, they will want to put you on ADT prior so that the prostate cancer cells are weakened and more receptive, I should say, to the radiation. So, staying alive in the second stage is about secondary treatment, which is almost always going to be radiation. Now, let's say you have surgery, then you have radiation for recurrence, and then down the line, your PSA starts to rise again. So at this point, you've kind of exhausted all avenues. Now, if you have a third occurrence of PSA rise, we want to keep you alive. We want to stay alive. All of us do. So there's a few different ways that these third recurrences are handled. They will almost invariably do a PSMA PET scan. And a PSMA test, it's a very specific PET scan that looks just for prostate cancer cells. And, if you have a PSMA PET scan after having surgery, after having radiation for recurrence, and they don't find anything, most likely they will then, as kind of the only remaining resource, put you on some form of ADT or some version of medication that resembles ADT that keeps testosterone levels lower. The interesting thing about long-term ADT treatment is that the research is showing you can do it intermittently, which basically means you might go on a medication. It might be a Lupron, and maybe an Orgovyx, or there are special tiers of new types of medications. Dr. Schultz in California talks about them, and you can see his YouTube channel. But what they're saying is you can be on an ADT for a period of time. Let's call it 6 months, maybe 12 months, maybe 9 months. And then you go off it. You just stop taking it for an equal period of time, 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, and then you start again. So the start-stop is something that appears to be very effective. And apparently you can do that for the rest of your life. And so in cases where people find themselves in that situation, that is the third approach. And I would tend to think that by the time you get to that third stage or that third part, you're very open to these medications because they are what will prevent this cancer from becoming more aggressive. The idea there is even on that third recurrence, you want to keep the levels low. So, the best way to stay alive is just to keep on PSA. It's quite simple. Keep monitoring PSA. And if it rises to a point which is of concern, make sure you're dealing with a specialist, somebody who really understands prostate cancer. Most urologists do, but you want to find yourself a good urologist oncologist, which is a urologist specializing in cancer. You want to find yourself a good radiation oncologist who also specializes in prostate cancer, because they can give you guidance on what treatments are done. It may also be the case where if you have a third recurrence and you are showing up on PSMA PET scans, parts of your body where cancer has started to appear, they can, to my understanding, do spot treatment where they'll radiate. Let's say it's in the bone somewhere, they'll radiate the bone. It's usually 4 or 5 sessions. It's nothing too grand, but kind of like a whack-a-mole approach where as things happen, they attack it. And so all of these things, there's no guarantee with any disease, but I think if your goal is what mine is, and that is to stay alive, then you will always try to figure out the best treatment for the situation you're in at that time. And it will be a progression over time. Those of you who are listening to this or watching this, who are newly diagnosed, this is the start of what could be a very short journey or a very long journey. The most important advice I would give you is to try to find a way from the outset to convince yourself that this is a fight and you're a warrior and you have to go into battle and you have to defeat this. The moment you crumble and the moment you basically collapse and give up and say, well, what can I do? It's cancer. Cancer is fatal. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? I just don't want to deal with this. The moment you start taking that down approach to this disease, somehow through some miraculous feat of wizardry, your brain will then instruct your body to die. I mean, I want to put it as simple as that. When you give up, your brain gives up and it signals your body that, you know what, we're not in for the fight. So just go ahead and ravage me with cancer and let's be done with it. The exact opposite is true, I believe. And now this is not medical advice, but this is my belief system. If you are a warrior and you're confronted with this disease, given the knowledge that it is fully curable, unlike pancreatic cancer or other cancers, which are almost always fatal, this is a curable cancer. If you are willing to take on the battle and make it your mantra that you must stay alive, you must do whatever you can to absolutely defeat this, then you'll be surprised how favorably your body will respond to treatment and how well you will recover. Now, I'm making a very blanket statement. We're all different. I'm only speaking from my experience from the get-go. Back in November 2015, when I shot my first video, my goal was to defeat this and to fight it. And here we are almost 9 years later. And that's exactly what I've been doing. I'm probably in one of the healthiest shapes of my life, mentally and physically. For the initial step of surgery, I went into it with a very positive attitude. I kept my body in shape. I did my Kegel exercises. I went into surgery with this gung-ho attitude that said, boom, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. And I came out on the other side with very minimal side effects. And even what I had then diminished quite quickly to a point where I got back to where I wanted to be with erectile function and continence. In my case, the reason I have a recurrence is not because of the surgery itself, but because the cancer sat on the edge of the prostate, what they call a positive margin. So there was a little bit left behind. And once again, not through the surgical method, but when you cut the prostate out, there was a point where you stop. You're into the prostate bed at that point. So when there's a recurrence from a positive margin, it can stay dormant. In my case, which it did. But anyway, I just wanted to reiterate this thought that stay positive, be a fighter. Don't let this get to you. The people who are around you, who love you and who you love, are your support system. There are some of you who don't have anybody. And what I encourage you to do is find a support system of some kind, whether it's a group of people who are like yourself. I would highly suggest, if you're not a religious person, what I would encourage you to do is find a support group, even at a church or synagogue or mosque. It doesn't matter. You don't have to follow the religion for these groups to embrace you, but you'll find a very welcome place, a very compassionate place. And if you do follow religion, belong to a church, synagogue, or a mosque, then use that system to really help you through this, because you'll find that your fellow worshipers will absolutely take care of you, and more so than you can ever imagine. But don't go through this alone. There is always a support system available to you, and fight every step of the way. And if you do, your odds of surviving this until the day you die, basically meaning until the day you die of something unrelated to prostate cancer, this will be something that you're dealing with, but you're suppressing it and you're fighting it as best you can. So anyway, these are just some words of wisdom I wanted to put out there. I always love to see the comments that you leave, whether you are listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcast, or watching in the YouTube or in my Facebook group. Please give me your comments. A lot of you have left comments how watching some of these podcasts or videos have really helped you. And that means so much to me. If I could help just one person get through this, I will have done my job. But to help 10 of you or 50 of you or even 100 or 1,000, whatever the number may be, that's what keeps me going. There's no benefit from me spending my time putting this content together other than to help anyone else who has to go through this disease and to help them survive as well. So I will keep posting over the weeks that come. And today is a Thursday. I don't know when you're listening or watching this, but I'm about to finish my second week of radiation, proton radiation, and it's going very well. I feel fine, a little tired, but I feel like it's the same me. I don't really feel like I'm going through anything horrific. It's easy enough to do. The only downside is I travel 2 hours to the radiation center, which is not close to where I live. So I spend Monday to Friday in Knoxville, Tennessee, and then I'm home on the weekends. So the only downside of this whole treatment plan is that I'm not home for 4 nights of the week. But you know what? I certainly will deal with it. It's only for 7 weeks. So keep the comments and posts coming. I'd love to hear your stories, and keep fighting, guys. Keep fighting, because it's all about staying alive. Okay, we'll see you next time.